Welcome to Fortress on a Hill. I'm Henry.
I'm Danny.
I'm Kagan.
We're three leftist veterans that aim to expose the reality of the U.S. military's multiple wars abroad and to illuminate the damage military service does to Americans.
American presidents throughout U.S. history have used American military and diplomatic power to force regime change of democratically elected governments around the world.
Most veterans come from families vested in prior service, and American generals choose their own, ensuring diversity of thought never interferes with American warmongering.
How can we stand by and do nothing while our military kills and destroys lives the world over, while telling Americans that all this death and destruction protects them from terrorists when nothing could be more false?
Fortress on a Hill aims to change that.
All right, everybody, welcome to this is special live edition of Fortress on a Hill. We have a very special guest with us today, someone that is quite well known throughout alternative media and talks and dissects so many very important issues that the mainstream media does not, along with a liberal amount of comedy and sarcasm to go with that. But that's how we get people to see things that they don't otherwise see. So, Lee Camp, thank you so much for joining us on Fortress on a Hill. Sorry, your mic was muted there for a second.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome. So, get my intro out here. Lee is the head writer and host of the national TV show Redacted Tonight with Lee Camp on RT America. He's a former contributor to The Onion, former staff humor writer for the Huffington Post, and his web series Moment of Clarity has been viewed by millions. He's toured the country and the world with his fierce brand of stand-up comedy. And George Carlin's daughter, Kelly, said Lee is one of the few comics keeping her father's torch lit. Bill Hicks' brother, Steve, said Lee is one of only a handful with Bill's message and passion, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Lee is also a co-host with Eleanor Goldfield of the podcast Common Censored, which just dissects many of these topics that we're going to go over this evening, and also the podcast Government Secrets with Graham Elwood. And if you would like to contribute to his work, his comedy, getting him to be able to be seen by as many people as possible, go to librapay.com/Lee Camp, and I'll have some banner reminders to see it later. So, but with that necessary introduction there, Lee, how are you doing this evening?
Not bad. Thank you for the intro. I should hire you as my agent. That was excellent.
Anytime.
Good to talk with you.
So, and before I forget, we my friend of the podcast is here with us, Nate Hankus, and a little bit later in the stream we're going to talk about a project that he has upcoming. But he was absolutely dying to jump in here and chat with Lee, and he's going to do that with us. Nate, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. The only thing I want to ask Lee tonight is how he got radicalized.
Well, we will definitely come to that.
Good.
Lee, I had one thing I wanted to discuss with you before I ask a few more in-depth questions about yourself.
Yeah.
And that is, I wanted to talk about Mike Gravel. Mike Gravel, for people who, many people listening will probably recognize his name. For those of you who don't, he passed away recently. He is a former two-term senator from Alaska. He is much more famously or notoriously known, depending on who you ask, of being the senator that read the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record. Which we just actually today, today is the 50th anniversary of the day that he did that. He ensured that vital information would make it to the American people. and found and that was absolutely something that our country needed at that time. Lee, tell me your thoughts about Mike Gravel.
Yeah, an incredible individual. And, I realize as we get farther and farther away from the actual moment that it happened, some people might not know. The Pentagon Papers revealed really the truth about Vietnam, what was really going on there, that there was no real plan that other than just kill as many Vietnamese as possible. Many things like that came out in those papers, and it was quite a scandal when it was revealed. It was obviously leaked by Daniel Ellsberg, who has become, famous for that. But Mike Gravel was the only senator who was willing to read it into the record so that it couldn't be censored, so that it would be in the permanent record. And Ellsberg went to a lot of other senators who all refused to have that kind of backbone, that kind of, I guess you should say gonads, because both men and women have gonads. So very impressive. But I did get to meet him once. I was performing at some conference or event, and he was running for president at the time. And I didn't talk to him, but I shook his hand. A very impressive guy. But then people may know him more recently as the presidential candidate who was really willing to go after our war machine, go after our empire of endless war on that debate stage with Obama and Hillary and Biden all standing next to him. And one of the most famous clips that's been making the rounds, they were talking about foreign policy in regards to Iran, and not much has changed. And he said, these people scare me. These people on this stage scare me. They're talking about nuclear war with Iran that would not just kill millions of innocents in Iran, it would kill millions of people in America, likely, if it ended up in a nuclear tit for tat. And, he was willing to say that in front of them, and they acted, they laughed or acted like it was ridiculous. And for saying those type of things, he was sidelined. He was, the mainstream media did not mention him. In many ways, similar treatment to Bernie Sanders. He was not allowed to get the interviews on mainstream media that allow you to garner larger percentages. They did their best to keep him out of the debates, but he was able to get into the earlier ones. And it's our system is meant to kind of purge or push out those people, even former senators, who are willing to speak the truth on these issues.
Absolutely. No, and also something that is for anybody wanting to learn more about him, that the Gravel Institute is still very much a thing. They have a YouTube channel and make videos on a variety of anti-war, anti-imperialist type topics. So if you folks, if you have the chance to go and check that out, please do. No, I feel very much that his choice to do that, his choice to read it into the record, should be seen in many ways as noteworthy as Dan Ellsberg's choice to leak the papers in the first place, because they both had to know, despite there being a little bit different risks, given that Gravel was a senator, what the payback was going to be, how the empire was going to bite back so severely, and they took those risks knowing that. And I think he is an absolutely fantastic addition to the very few anti-war heroes that we have that have reached those levels of government. Yeah. And I hope that people remember him and remember the sacrifices that he made.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely patriotic to put your neck out on the line for your country like that.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times, like, the war machine will twist it so it doesn't seem patriotic, but it truly is for the good of the country.
Well, one other thing that I wanted to mention about him specifically is that he actually served as a counterintelligence agent in the U.S. Army before he got involved in politics. And I know that experience really opened his eyes to the methods and mannerisms of the empire, so to speak, understanding how information gets classified, overclassified, just in order to be able to be hid. And of course, he was serving during the Korean War, but he was stationed in Germany, and so I'm sure his view to that whole debacle and all the death and destruction that came from it was very, very. It was a very big part of why he ended up doing what he did. So Lee, I want to know more about you. I want to know more about how you came to what where you are in your life today. Can you give us a little taste, please?
Yeah, it started as just wanting to be a comedian. I didn't start off as as you termed it, radicalized. I didn't start off as a radical. I started off as a kid that wanted to make people laugh, wanted to initially write comedy. I started writing at about age 12. And then at 17, 18, I started wanting to perform it, even though I'd never been on a stage before. And so I started going to like open mic nights and stuff like that. But, back then I just wanted to be like Jerry Seinfeld. I just wanted to be telling jokes about how the candy bar doesn't come out of the vending machine when you push the button. And it was not making any kind of larger point. It was just trying to be funny. And so that's kind of how it started, just trying to get the laugh. And then I moved to New York after college to do just that, to become a comedian. And I became more and more political, caring more about what we were seeing in our lives, in our world. And, some of that had to do with the Iraq War. That kind of woke me up a little, because I started asking the questions that you need to ask in order to realize that these wars are not based on helping anybody or bringing democracy or, those kind of bullshit reasons they give you. You got to start asking questions. And so, that attack on Iraq definitely, and it kept going for years, obviously, got me to start reading more and learning more, and, programs that unfortunately are not as good as they used to be, but like Democracy Now! Helped wake me up. Chomsky, who I interviewed for the first time actually this past week, reading him when I was 22, 23, helped me get outside of kind of that mainstream media brainwashing. You really do think that, like, even if you don't believe every word on CNN, you figure most of it is essentially the truth. But once you've really informed yourself and seen outside of it, you can pick apart just about every sentence they say as being some kind of propaganda. Sometimes the propaganda is so deep and we've been so brainwashed by our cultural system that they don't even realize some of it. And then on top of that, you have just the choices of what they're covering. I mean, we mentioned Mike Gravel. Not covering Mike Gravel is a significant choice when he was running for president. Talking about, Trump, in my view, was very dangerous in a lot of ways. However, by covering him 90% of the time, what are they ignoring? Well, they're ignoring everything else that continues unfettered, unimpeded. The environmental collapse, the oceans are filling with plastic, the pollution of the waterways, pollution of the air, all of that is not being covered. So that is a choice. That is a propaganda choice to not cover that stuff. Along with so many other things, prison industrial complex, police brutality, et cetera, et cetera. So, Wall Street's continued exploitation of your average American. It is a choice to cover all that over, to put up a smoke screen and say, no, all that matters is what Ted Cruz said yesterday. And once you see beyond that, it's kind of the type of thing where you can't back off it. You can't unsee it. It is seeing through the matrix, and you can't unsee it. And I started putting more and more of it into my stand-up, those kind of topics, those kind of ideas. And I very much wanted to have, at that point, a stand-up act that mattered. I wanted to be on stage. If I was going to do something, I mean, there's very few things in America that are left, performance venues, where someone gets on stage and speaks their mind. Because, performing a play is not speaking your mind, it's reading a script. And playing music can sometimes be your mind, but really that's kind of covered over in enough layers that people could be dancing to a song they disagree with and not necessarily even know it. so there's almost nothing except stand-up comedy where people get on a stage and people come in a live audience and want to hear what that person is thinking at that moment. And so it just felt like such a gift to be on that stage. And I wanted to use it for something more important than, why are airline seats so small? And so it just kind of kept growing like that. And then the career I had planned or saw in my head of being on TV and doing comedy specials on Comedy Central and stuff like that basically slowly evaporated over the span of a few years because they don't want you on TV doing those things. There is politics on like Comedy Central, but it is a specific brand of politics. It is usually already famous comedians talking about politics in a way that still fits inside the Overton window, that still is kind of inside your allowable corporate thought points, talking points. And so what I was doing was not acceptable. And luckily I came along in a time when YouTube was a little more free and they'd actually allow things to grow organically. And Moment of Clarity, my video series, became popular, and I went from there. I got a show on RT America, which is unfortunately one of the only global and national networks that will allow me complete and utter freedom, that has never told me what to say. I write all my own words, and that type of thing does not exist in our corporate media landscape. It is not a thing. And there are career graveyards filled with people, or their careers filled with people who spoke out, who even once they achieved great fame, people like Phil Donahue, Jesse Ventura, they get up to a point and they are hugely well-known, hugely famous, hugely successful, and they start speaking out against war, and then MSNBC or wherever is like, you know what? You're not right for us. So that's my rant on that.
Someone in the chat reminded me that you are a direct descendant of Robert E. Lee, and I'm curious about how that history has played a role in your life. I'm sure it's something that at some point you took some time and traced that stuff back, wanted to understand more, and I'm curious as to what did you find about yourself in hearing that history?
Yeah, on my father's side, it's kind of old American colonist. It is, we have Nellie Washington's hand towel. Nellie was Washington's niece. We have her hand towel, and they actually signed it back then because these were fine, nice hand towels that were expensive for the time. So it's got her signature on it, and it's framed in our house. And descended from John Marshall, Supreme Court Justice, and Robert E. Lee. And then also probably the most important one is descended directly from Walter Camp, who basically, he's called the godfather of American football. He invented American football. So that's the really important one. The others, forget them. But so yeah, it is kind of crazy, and in some regards, I grew up in Accommodation, Washington D.C. Then we moved to Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy, and I was like 12 years old before anyone bothered to tell me that the South had lost the war. I knew about the Civil War. I knew I was named after Robert E. Lee, but I thought, well, you wouldn't name me after a loser, so we must have won. But yeah, it's kind of crazy in that regard. But I'd like to think maybe not with Robert E. Lee, but fighting for owning slaves. But with the others, I'd like to think that maybe there was some voice in their head that knows that the most patriotic thing you can do is speak out for the truth, is call America to account for our current sins and our past sins, and try and make people informed. And I hope there would be a piece of them that would see that as the best thing you can do in a country like it is today, even though they could never imagine what insanity we'd be involved in. So, maybe some people could say my lineage is contradictory, but I've never really viewed it that way.
So you shared with me about your dad's book, who was an Army psychiatrist who served in Vietnam, and I got to tell you, man, I'm floored by some of the things that he shared about the clarity and the honesty in a government document, essentially in a place where you generally wouldn't find that. You would think that someone was checking what he was actually writing before it got published, but with the military, it can get lost entirely. Can you tell us a little bit about your dad and just how his book, how his time in Vietnam came across to you?
Yeah, Army doctor, psychoanalyst, and in Vietnam for a year, and in the military for 20 years, and as time went on, I think he had the question a lot of people had in Vietnam, which he wasn't so radical that he thought the protesters are necessarily right about everything with Vietnam, but he thought the military was getting it wrong. He was looking at the level of mental illness and PTSD, and people are self-medicating with drug abuse, which of course makes sense if you're put in that situation. And he was saying, this is the wrong way to do it. What's being done to these young men and women. And he was under 40, I think, but he was older compared to 20-year-olds. And so he looked at it as like they're getting the mental health of our military wrong and dealing with it wrong. And they're not, basically doctors would look over a soldier for, 10 minutes and say, yeah, you're fit to go back out. Meanwhile, the guy is completely a wreck and completely mentally ill, at least in that moment, dealing with the stress and how horrible things were. And they're just sent back out there. And nowadays we see it with tour after tour after tour, not actually analyzing the mental health aspect in a deeper way. And it upset him. And he didn't write this book this book only came out 5 years ago, and he didn't write it for 20 years or even start working on it for 20 years or whatever, because he thought there's no way somebody else who maybe is more qualified won't write this. There's, someone who was there for 3 tours or whatever. And he kept waiting for somebody to write that book on mental health in the military, specifically in Vietnam. And it never happened. So then he eventually decided, I guess it's me. And he started putting together this book and spent, 10 or 20 years on that book. And he wouldn't have had the records to be able to give the actual source material if it weren't for the fact that a few doctors held on to their records against orders, against commands, which were turn over all your records when you leave Vietnam, and then the military either has them hidden in some basement somewhere or they burn them all, who knows. But so if it weren't for 2 doctors being like, these might be important and hanging on to them, you'd have no source material for all of this, and the book couldn't be written. But luckily, he got some of it by these doctors going against their orders, and it's pretty breathtaking to read the true story of drug addiction, mental health issues, PTSD. All of it that went on in Vietnam and continues to go on today, largely. And his name, if anyone wants to look it up, his name is Norman Camp, by the way.
I'll make sure we include some good notes so people can find it, check it out if they'd like to. I found so much of what I've been reading, and I'm going to finish every word of it, dealing with the same issues that we dealt with in Iraq, and that have been seen in Afghanistan. It just continues in a different format. I had emailed you when we were setting this up about the good controlled substances versus the bad ones, the ones that that it's perfectly okay for soldiers and all the other troops to get entirely fucked up on alcohol, but all of these other things are it's almost like being cursed. And I actually I don't think I mentioned this to you while we were chatting, but I was a drug investigator in the Army for 2 years.
Oh, really?
And I spoke with soldiers a lot about their substance abuse in different ways, and the vast I would say a great many of them said that I chose to do this. I'm speaking about marijuana here, that I chose to do this because I had no other choice. There was no other relief in some other way, and also it was also for a lot of them it was a cry for help. But to have that connection, to be able to go back and look at all of that information about Vietnam is just incredible. I'm learning so much, and like you said, that was an incredible risk. If somebody knew that the doctor who actually held onto his records actually did that back in the day, I mean, these days no one would be able to prove anything, but the Army would have just smashed them with every institution that it possibly could have, simply on the idea that people wanted to learn more. We're not even getting into quite to anti-war or anti-interventionist stuff. We're just talking about trying to make things better for soldiers who are in this horrible situation. Let me get my notes back here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I got one question here that I wanted to throw out for you real quick. Can Lee Camp speak on COINTELPRO with anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist movements, and Biden declaring anti-capitalists as quote unquote domestic violence extremists?
Yeah, most people probably know COINTELPRO was the program in the 60s, and maybe it went into the 70s, of infiltrating activist groups, disrupting them, doing everything they could, finding reasons to arresting them for small drug charges. Sometimes, there's been clear evidence with Black Panthers and stuff of the FBI, et cetera, putting out false pamphlets that looked like they were from some other group, so that or some other person, so that the groups would end up infighting, trashing each other. It was every game you could come up with. And when it came out that COINTELPRO was a real program, it was kind of a scandal. It was like, oh my God, can you believe that our own government is involved in going after activists like this? And nowadays, it's kind of just the norm. It's just like when these things come out, like all of the surveillance that Snowden revealed, and I mean, at least that one got some media coverage, but a lot of this stuff hardly gets even coverage now. I mean, CIA's operation, I believe it was Mockingbird, where they infiltrated news media, is not it doesn't need to be a secret program anymore. MSNBC just says, now let's go to the former head of the CIA. And that's just standard operating procedure for our media. So a lot of the things that used to be scandalous are now considered just our government, the way it works, which is horrific. And it should piss off everyone. Like, we should still be pissed off every time we find out that our government is infiltrating groups. The extent by the end of, after a few months at Occupy Wall Street, about a third of the people down there were either plainclothes cops or FBI or whatever other agency, DHS. And it's like, I mean, the efforts that our government goes to destroy our own citizens, almost exclusively peaceful activists, is amazing. It's tremendous, and it makes them into it turns it into a battle against our own citizens, which again should piss off everyone. And yeah, what that person was referencing is there's been some new documents that basically group anti-capitalist activists as like violent extremists. which you can be. There are economics professors who are anti-capitalist. You know, you can be anti-capitalist from reading books. It doesn't mean you're going to go out and kill someone. So, of course, this is just yet another step in trying to stop and sideline freedom of speech, freedom of, press, posting things online. Independent journalists are being attacked. And, of course, the biggest one that everyone knows is Julian Assange, one of the most impressive and successful journalists of our time, someone who never published anything false. I mean, think about that. WikiLeaks has never published anything false. Compare that to any other mainstream outlet who they published and retract things endlessly on a daily basis. So this is someone who only published the truth and has now been tortured 2 years in prison, 7 years in basically one room in the Ecuadorian embassy. So a total of over 9 years. And the latest thing that happened this week is that the other key witness against Assange has now admitted that he was lying. So everything against Assange has collapsed, and yet they keep him in prison. And, that was initially thanks to the Trump administration, but now it's the Biden administration. So anyone who thinks Biden is somehow more just or moral, if he wants to even pretend to be, he's got to release Julian Assange immediately.
Yeah, I had a very short thought about, maybe since the Obama administration decided not to go after him, that Biden might. No. And I before I got to the end of the thought, I stopped it. It was just like, no, get that shit out of here. So,
the Obama administration decided not to go after him because of something they termed the New York Times problem. And the New York Times problem was that there's nothing to differentiate what Assange did and what the New York Times does. In fact, they used WikiLeaks releases in their reporting. So did The Guardian, so did Washington Post. So for them to arrest and imprison Assange is basically saying anybody writing for the New York Times is equivalently criminal. So they've tried to make it different than the New York Times by getting this false witness who has now just admitted he was lying, a longtime fraudster who has all other kinds of criminal complaints and cases against him, and just lied to get free, to get off other charges, unrelated charges. So he agreed to lie for the FBI against Assange. And, that's all been revealed. And that's what they did to try and make it seem like it's different than the New York Times. But in fact, there is no difference, except that Assange has always been correct.
Yeah, I was really uplifted that they chose not to extradite him, but of course it was only because of one little shred of dignity that court system has in terms of seeing the condition the man is in, the condition that the UK government and our government have been absolutely hand in hand with. It's fucking disgusting.
Yeah, they basically the judge agreed with everything that the U.S. Department of Justice put forward, which was all lies combined with bullshit heaped on top of crap. And the judge agreed with all of it and just said, we won't extradite him because U.S. prisons are uniquely horrible and he may kill himself. And that was the only reason she didn't extradite him. So the U.S. it shows the UK system, court system, is as corrupt and as pathetic in their judgment as the U.S. system would be if he were extradited here. He's facing 175 years for telling all of us the truth about the wars that were being done in our name.
I don't even think the sentencing guidelines for Derek Chauvin would allow him to be put in jail for that long.
Right.
And yet they're doing it to Julian. It's freaking horrific. So Lee, I wanted to ask you about a subject, a person that is very, I hold very highly, and that is George Carlin. George Carlin was someone that his comedy, made me a skeptical person back before I was as skeptical as I am today. but in terms of really going after what people are doing, like his sketch about the Gulf War and us wanting to go play with our toys in the sand, and he did that, it's in a childish voice. Let's go play with our toys in the sand, and that's what we did. No one was helped. Thousands of people died, many more Iraqis than Americans, to be sure. But you also have a connection to George Carlin, both through your comedy and through Brenda, of knowing his daughter, and I'd love to hear you share a little bit about that.
Kelly Carlin.
Kelly, excuse me, sorry.
Kelly's been amazing. She's a wonderful woman. Everybody immediately asks, is she a comedian? No, she has done a one-woman show on what it was like to grow up in that family, and she also has a book out, which people could check out if they want to hear her life story. She came up to me after I was on the set of taping a show with Paul Provenza, another amazing guy, kind of a mentor of mine back in the day. And in it, he played my Fox News clip where I was on Fox News one time in 2008, and I called them a parade of propaganda and a festival of ignorance. And they were not expecting that. And they then told their audience that after the commercial break, that they had kicked me out of the building, physically removed me, which wasn't true, but that they needed to tell their audience, anybody who tells the truth on our airwaves will be kicked out of the building. Anyway, they played that clip, and Kelly came up to me after the taping. She was there and said, "You remind me of my father," and so I talked to her about that, and we had a little friendship, and I asked if she would do kind of a opening thing at my taping of my stand-up special, and so she came and did that, and she's an amazing woman who's really taken it upon herself to keep her dad's legacy going, and it's been an honor to know her. I actually saw her for the first time in a few years just a couple weeks ago, and in terms of him, he was I never met him, never knew him, but he was pivotal in my comedy. He showed me once I did start kind of waking up more and realizing that I wanted to put the type of comedy that makes some people cringe, makes some people walk out of the room, makes some people uncomfortable. Once I started realizing I wanted to do more of that instead of observational comedy, he was definitely someone that was an inspiration. I saw what was possible. I saw, how willing he was to scare people, to alienate people who didn't get it. And you kind of got to have a lot of nerve to want to get on a stage, want to make people laugh, but also be willing to piss them off. Also be willing to people who are fully indoctrinated and not willing to hear these type of things they will walk out. And that was kind of initially against my goals, because my goal is to make everybody laugh. But I realized that, to really get those laughs where people are scared, where people start to realize the truth, was what I really wanted to go for. And actually to a little more answer, I guess I've kind of answered, but to a little more answer your question, Nate, I once I started getting involved a little in activism and stuff, I'd say one big moment that kind of radicalized me, because it made me realize how dumb our leaders were, but also how a handful of people could have a large change, could create large change. There was a prisoner who was going to be executed in Texas named Kenneth Foster. And unlike every death penalty case you've probably ever heard, even the prosecution said he had not killed anyone. He had not killed anyone. They said he was driving a car. His friend got out, got in a fight, killed someone in the fight, and then he drove off with the friend. And so they were I think they'd already executed the guy who committed the murder, and now they wanted to kill the guy who drove the car, even though it wasn't any kind of planned murder or anything like that. But in Texas, which I think is the only state where they allow this, they're allowed to execute somebody who did not kill someone. And it was about 4 days from his execution, and very few people were talking about it. I mean, it got some activism. There were some amazing activists in Texas who were sitting in Rick Perry's driveway and shit like that. But I was in New York at the time, and I called the governor to say, don't execute this guy. And, of course, you get his secretary, and she said, okay, I'll add you to the tally. And I was like, tally? Like literally she's sitting there at a phone going, okay, one person says kill him, one says don't. Like it seems so meaningless and so pathetic and so weak. And I was like, there's got to be, even being in New York while this is going on in Texas, there's got to be some way I can have a little more impact. So like a day later, I called back and I said, and I had a whole lie planned out. I said, I'm with a film crew, and I made up a fake fake production company that sounded real. And I said, we're doing a film on documentary on the death of Kenneth Foster. And we want to interview Rick Perry about, why Kenneth Foster needed to be executed. And she clearly bought it. She said she put me through the press secretary, and then I told her the whole story. And she says, okay, well, I'll have to ask the governor, and we'll get back to you. What's how can we reach you? And I said, well, the email for the film is bloodontexashands.com. Info at bloodontexashands.com. And she seemed a little shocked, and then asked me how to spell it. And of course I never got an email, but I'm about 100% positive she brought it to the governor, because that's her job. If a documentary is going to be done about Rick Perry, the governor, you're going to go tell him it's being done. And so I think that along with these activists in Texas, and there were some other people speaking out, but it wasn't like a national story. And anyway, Rick Perry commutes the guy's sentence, and it's one of a handful of people that he commuted, because Rick Perry executed more people than George Bush as governor of Texas. Loved killing people, but he saved Kenneth Foster's life. And so I know it wasn't just me, but it felt like a small number of people can have an impact, can save a life. And it was pivotal to me, because it made me feel like these small acts have an impact in a way that is much larger than just, having an argument with your neighbor. And it kind of changed it, because it felt like if you can have that impact, then you should do it. And that to me, that felt pretty pivotal.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a message that needs to be out in the world now more than ever. There seems to be a lack of hope in the zeitgeist right now, and when people feel like they have power and control over their destiny or that of the nation, it's going to be better for everyone's mental health in general, and hopefully we'll move that needle. So yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. And I just want to ask, what was his skin color?
Oh, black, of course.
Yeah.
I used to do a lot of work on the death penalty, trying to end the death penalty. Of course, we're one of only a few countries that still actively does it. And the number one determinant of whether someone gets executed, and I think a lot of people assume it's just, skin color if they're black. But no, the key factor is race of the victim. Because apparently killing a black person in our society doesn't really matter. They'll lock you up, but they won't execute you, because it's not as big. Apparently in the eyes of our society, of our country, killing a black person is not that big a deal, but killing a white person is much more substantial. So the number one determinant is race of the victim, which is just another factor of how racist it is. Obviously, black people are also more likely to be executed, et cetera. But
I saw they're bringing back the shooting squads. Did you hear that? I forget what states it was, but southern states, as you can imagine.
A few states. I think Idaho might have been one of them. But yeah, it's disgusting on so many levels. But the reason they're doing that is because other countries refused to sell us the drugs to execute people with lethal injection, because they found out we were using it for that. So now,
interesting.
So states are running out of the lethal injection drugs, which is also still cruel and unusual. I mean, they act like it's somehow better. It's still horrific.
Right.
And so now they're switching to things like firing squads. I mean, it's so unimaginably barbaric. Every argument that people come forward for the death penalty breaks down if you just think about it for 3 seconds. I mean, people will say, oh, well, an eye for an eye. And I'm like, that is not how we legislate any other law, any other crime in our country. If you rape someone, you are not sentenced to be raped. If you set someone's house on fire, you don't have your house burned down. We don't even do an eye for an eye in the case of someone stealing someone's eye. Yeah. So why would we only do it for death? It's so ridiculous. And yet these are like the arguments that people resort to.
I'd have to imagine there's an economic argument as well. Like, we don't want to pay to have this person in prison for life. It's cheaper just to kill them. Like, is that an argument you've heard?
You are correct. That argument comes up, and that argument also incorrect. Yeah. It's often more expensive to execute them because of the legal proceedings.
Interesting.
The mandatory appeals and everything often end up with, high-powered lawyers, many cases, many years. So actually executing someone is often more expensive than keeping them in prison.
I wasn't fighting for that argument.
I know.
Bringing it up because it's ludicrous. It's a ludicrous way to think.
Even if it were, because the other is, even if it were more expensive to keep them alive in prison, how disgusting is it to point out that like 1 penny from each taxpayer, rather than keep someone alive, let's and pay 1 penny a year from each taxpayer, let's just kill them. I mean, that idea is so gross.
Yeah.
So Lee, we're just past the 45-minute mark. I want to be mindful of your time. We're going to chat about Nate's project, but you're welcome to stick around if you'd like to hear about it. I'm excited to hear about it.
I do have to run to another thing, but I really do appreciate you guys having me on, and I hope you'll keep in touch and keep doing what you do.
Absolutely, we will definitely do this again sometime.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Thanks, Lee. Great to see you.
Our podcast is supported in a few different ways. First, there's Patreon, where we're blessed to have an array of wonderful supporters, helping the guys and I pay for some of the podcast's expenses. Those who contribute $10 a month or more will be mentioned right here as an honorary producer, helping keep you, our listeners, stocked with new episodes. But you don't have to contribute $10 a month to help us. For as little as $1 a month, you can help keep us going, paying for hosting and storage fees, transcribing old and new episodes, promoting and expanding the podcast, and more I'm sure I can't think of at the moment. So let's bring out our honorary producers, and they are Will Arens, Fahim Shirazi, James O'Barr, Adam Bellows, Eric Phillips, Paul Appel, Julie Dupree, Thomas Benson, Janet Hansen, Tristan Oliver, Daniel Fleming, Michael Karen, Zach H., Ren Jacob, Howard Reynolds, Why I Am Anti-War Podcast, Scott Spaulding, Kenneth Cordasco, Korgoth, and the Status Quo Podcast. Your contributions are wonderfully helpful to us. Thank you so much. However, if Patreon isn't your style, you can contribute directly to us through PayPal at paypal.me/Fortress on a Hill. Or please check out our awesome store on Spreadshirt.com for some great Fortress merch. The link is in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the podcast.
All righty, Nate. Just you and me, man.
Yeah, cool, Henry.
So, tell me about this project and give me a little bit of background on how you came to decide to do it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so the project is, I'm actually going to provide paid artistic residencies for post 9/11 writers. So I've got a studio apartment on my property, and I'm just going to make it available for 5-month residencies, and I'm raising donations right now so that we can give the writers a stipend. So, I wrote a book when I got out of the military. It was super healing for my mental health and just my process of, I tell people I was spiritually constipated and I just had to move it out of me to move on. And if I could make that a process available to other writers, veterans, that's a worthy use of my time and resources. And I am looking for a specific type of writer, but I'm realizing that the community is not that big of veteran writers. So anyone that applies at the website, I'll definitely give a fair look. So the name of the program is Veteran Artist Residencies, and you can find it online at veteranarts.org. And there's a few ways to help. We're doing a Patreon-like blog subscription. So for now, I'm managing the blog and I'm writing articles. I just released an article called The Useful Idiot, which actually got a pretty big response. It was, I released it at 6 a.m. Saturday morning, and within an hour, I had 2 messages like, dude, that article shook me. I just kind of looked at the origins of the Iraq War and like what Lee was talking about, looked behind some of the messaging that we were all getting, and then just explored the idea of if someone joined the military because of that messaging, which was a lie, then by definition, that would make them a useful idiot, which is a political terminology for someone who is manipulated to advance a political cause. So it's definitely an uncomfortable thing to look at, but it's an idea that came to me and I thought it was worth exploring. And I'm going to use the blog for multiple things, but one of the aspects I'm looking forward to is when I do have a veteran working in that space, they're going to share their creative process. They're going to share if they're comfortable with it, their work as they're working on it. They're going to share what's going on with their inner world as they suddenly have this 5-month span where they're not worried about survival, making money, all this stuff. And I'm hoping there's some powerful transformations in that container that I'm trying to make available for them. I'm going to introduce them to yoga. Yoga is a thing that really helped me. I got deep into it. It regulates the nervous system, which there's science behind all of it. And a lot of people hear yoga, they're like, oh, that's for girls and just get flexible or whatever. But there's a long history of ascetic monks in the lowlands and the mountains of India using this discipline to train their mind. And we know how much the mind is an issue for a lot of veterans, especially when they come home. So I'm going to try to introduce that to any veterans that are on site if it's something that appeals to them. So I've got that blog. I've got, I'm trying to make it fun for people. I've got these Fund Art, Not War stickers. So
Nice.
If people donate, I'm saying $50 or more, but you guys can send me a message if you donate and you don't have the means to hit $50. Just send me a message and I'll mail those out to anyone who donates. And people can contact me directly about any of this stuff. Instagram is my preferred platform. It's at NBHankus, and they can find me there. And then, of course, 50% of my book sales have been going towards a nonprofit, and that's really the only reason I was able to get it launched in the first place. You had me on for the book originally, Waking Up on the Appalachian Trail, and so 50% of sales go to that. That's the book I was referring to that I wrote, where realistically I didn't understand my inner emotional world. I didn't understand any of the issues that were causing me to suffer or causing me to just run into troubles, basically tripping on my own feet in life. And I use that writing process just kind of to grope in the dark as I'm exploring all these ideas and concepts. And I attribute that to part of my, I want to say I had a transformational experience, and it was definitely facilitated through that writing process. Another way people can participate is just subscribe to the mailing list, and you'll get an update on, hey, this is who we're talking to. This is when we think we'll have a veteran out. This is how many. I'm going to keep track of how many words have been written over the course of this mission, and it's limited in scope. So I don't want to dedicate my life specifically to this mission. I've got more books inside of me that I want to write, and I'm looking for 4 veterans. That's my goal, is to help 4 veterans. And my unofficial mission with selecting veterans is I'm looking for the next Kurt Vonnegut. You've read some Kurt?
I have. It's amazing.
Yeah. So he was this guy who came onto the scene after World War II, and like Lee, like George Carlin, just started poking holes and asking questions and just showing people a side of America, foreign policy, capitalism that maybe they weren't used to hearing about in the mainstream conversation. So, the writers don't have to be super radical or anything. I'm just looking for people that are a voice of reason, people that have something to say. I know how hard it is to be grinding on a book when you're trying to manage everything else. So I think one of the greatest gifts as a writer that could be given is that freedom to create. And that's what we're trying to do with this program.
Will you give me your email address and the name of the website again, please?
Yeah. The name of the website is veteranarts.org. And then do you want I don't know if I want to give out my email address, but I can do my Instagram, and people can DM me on there. Yeah. So that's @NBHankus. And then just going to that website is where you can read more about different ways you can contribute or participate. And I've been really impressed since I launched the program and started publicizing it. I've been digging more into like the veteran literary scene. And of course, Danny, you guys are friends with Christian Sorensen. He's a voice out there. I'm trying to get him out here. I think I'm reading his book now, and he's so prolific and such an astute researcher. I can only imagine what he could accomplish with 5 months just free. So
absolutely, yeah.
Anyone who's on this, the Fortress on a Hill family that's got the ear of Christian, you should really tell him to come out here. I think he could accomplish a lot. But
yeah, I'll definitely book him about it.
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do. Like I said, 4 veterans, 5 months. And any of the donations are essentially going straight into the veteran's pocket so that they don't have to have that survival anxiety about money while they're staying. And that Patreon, I've got, but I've only been talking to about friends and on my personal social media, which isn't huge. And so I've got like 8 people on there. If I could get 132 people, that would pay for the entire mission. And since it's a limited scope, it'd just be a 2-year commitment for anyone who's subscribing, and you'd have full access to the journey, what we're accomplishing here, and you'd get to see how the sausage is made if you're into writing. So that I think that'd be pretty interesting for folks.
What's your Patreon username?
It's not Patreon. It's a platform called Ghost. I just say Patreon because people kind of know what that is.
Sure.
So they can just find it on the website.
Okay.
And there's a link to it there. It kind of gives them a list of ways they can support it. But I think it's cool. I think we can, advance the mission of the cause. We can hopefully launch some veterans and a career on writing, if they have that time to focus, that that's enough time to master a manuscript if you're diligent and work hard at it. So I think that could be very good for anyone who's interested. And I'm looking for people to apply, and you can do that at that website, veteranarts.org. You don't necessarily have to be published. I just want to see some evidence that someone's been, sharpening their blade for a few years to get over some of those rookie hurdles, and that if they come on site, they'll be ready to hit the ground and create their masterpiece that's going to change the mind of the nation. That's what I'm trying to accomplish.
I would imagine that it would probably be, the first few years after getting out of the military, there's kind of a haze. You're trying to get readjusted. You're trying to decide what you're going to do career-wise, politically wise. There's so many questions. I could see that trying to do something like your project after a few years might bring someone a little easier time putting thought on the page. Yeah. But also, I could also see the benefit of somebody doing it real quickly after they got out of service, because there's a lot of stuff that we, as we move further and further away from wearing the uniform, we forget things. We don't see the institution in quite the same way as we do as veterans. So I could see either of those situations. It could, depending on the person. But
there's plenty of people I'm finding in the vet literary scene that are still in uniform, and they're starting to get into it because they're seeing all these other veterans out there writing, and they can relate to the words that are being written. And I actually think that if someone got out of the military and directly came into an opportunity like this, that those 2 years you were talking about, those few years of getting adjusted, I feel like that can cause a lot of psychological damage. So that could, just get beat up a little bit and trying to figure it out, and you get more lost and confused. So I feel like if they were able to come, shortly after separation from service, which would realistically be a great time for someone to relocate, just a 5-month stop off to get to your next location, that would probably be super helpful in their development, and like you said, in the writing as well. And if I have to sell it a little more, my house is like 10 minutes from some of the most beautiful beaches in America.
On the coast too.
Just look up Trinidad, California, and some of the pictures that'll show up will just blow your mind. And that's my backyard. So I'm trying to make a sweet deal for veterans, and we're just going to have to find veterans that, it fits in the shape of their life. I'm talking to, right now I'm talking to one veteran. She's won awards for writing scripts, and, she's interested, and we're just going to see, if an opportunity like this can fit with her life, and, be interesting to see the kind of output that someone who's been in the game for quite a while could, what they could produce with that amount of time, just to create, just that freedom to let their mind roam. The thoughts expand a little bit. You have a little deeper thoughts or more penetrating insights. So that's what that's the container I'm trying to create.
Sounds great, dude. It really does.
Go ahead.
If I was a maybe on trying to come before being on the beach is a you just won me over.
It's helpful.
No, that's what you mentioned about people still being in, and Danny wrote his first book, and much of his writing came while he was still in service, and I'm sure that those connections, there were lots of articles in terms of the officers he had served with, and kind of his observations of them as time went on. But you lose touch on those things so quickly, not just in terms of your memory, but in terms of people, because not everybody, you're not Facebook friends with everyone,
right?
And also I wanted to take just a second and plug your book, because it is a really great it's a really great piece of work. It's the journey that you take hiking on the Appalachian Trail, and that just so everybody knows is that Nate and a buddy of his hiked the entire Appalachian Trail, and this is his process of it, how getting up the first few hills and deciding that certain things were too heavy and getting rid of them, and but there's so much more to it. It's a deep journey literally over thousands of miles, and I really enjoyed it. I'll make sure to add a link for it in the notes for the live stream, so everybody can take a look.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to read that. I know as a host, people are coming on promoting things, and I was honored that you read it. And it is a journey within a journey. I basically met someone like Lee when I was hiking the trail, and he's blowing my mind with all these things, and talking about Chomsky, and
what was that fellow's name?
Patrick. In the book, it's Dylan. In real life, it's Patrick. I just wanted to give him a little protection there. But, he'd read all the books that had the type of information that I intuitively needed. He had these 2 long braids. He'd openly talk about smoking marijuana, which, coming from conservative small town Midwest, it's like, this is an exotic character. and being in the military, and there's a part of me when I was in the military, I was a unmanned aerial vehicle operator for 4 years, did 1 deployment in Baghdad, Iraq. But I really wanted to be free. When you're in the military, boots, shave, uniform, they tell you where to be. And I was just like glamorizing this idea of freedom. And here comes this guy, this Dylan character in my book. And he basically like personified that. And I was really intrigued because the first time we met, he just talked about a canoe trip he took down the Mississippi River from Source in Minnesota, just canoed all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And I thought, this guy's interesting. And then throughout the book, we keep bumping into this character. He'll mention things, then I'll go like, oh, I should ask him about that the next time I see him, if I do. And, the conversation progressively goes deeper, and he starts revealing some things that are hard for me to accept. But, intuitively, I'm like, that's the truth. And it does hurt me on the inside because I based a lot of my decisions leading up to joining the military on information that just wasn't accurate, which I think a lot of people are opening up to. I know Tulsi Gabbard, when she was on the stage, she's like, we were lied to, like, what, so and like I said, the whole process of that book was just one of self-discovery, self-inquiry, self-exploration, figuring out what I believe, figuring out kind of exercising some of those demons that lay hidden in your subconscious. And it's medicine. And I think based on some of the reactions that I've gotten from the book, from veterans have been very positive. And then just from people who, they don't have a Lee in their life. They don't have a Henry in their life. They don't have a Danny. And they say, hey, this really shook my foundational understanding of reality. And I'm going to have to take some time to process. And for me, that's what I was trying to do. And those are the types of messages that I really appreciate hearing. So thanks for letting me talk about the book a bit.
Oh, of course. No, like I said, it's a great read, and people get to go on a journey with you as you're going through all of this and questioning things that you had never questioned before. I don't know if we'd want to call them latent beliefs or whatever that we'd see them as, but there are days, either I'm reading or I'm making, something for the podcast or recording the podcast, and I read something, or generally it's Danny says something, and it does it to me again. it does, the same thing is that I just realized is that my how narrow a single person serving in the military's view is because of what they end up doing. And it's the military is such a big organism, and we all want to think of ourselves as unique. We're in unique units and we're not as good as the other guys' units. But I'm glad that I'm still honest enough with myself that those things happen. And it's like, wow, I never heard that before. That was and I keep thinking them. They're all things that I wish were in the recruiting pamphlet. Of course, no one would join the military if they were in the pamphlet.
You have an example off the top of your head? Just something that, is it just like Danny saying?
I remember we were talking to Abner. I can never remember how to pronounce his last name right, but he's the executive director of Breaking the Silence, and he's a former member of the Israeli Defense Force. And the Breaking the Silence, they collect testimonies from former IDF personnel about operations in the Palestinian territories. And we were talking about, he mentioned, and I don't remember the specific name that they used, but it was for an operation where they would set up an observation post in a person's home, and they would literally go to the door, kick everyone out of the house, do whatever they did to the house, and whatever was left there, the people could have back, I guess. And he was mentioning that, and I pointed it out as like, wow, that's just really awful to me. And Danny mentioned is like, this is something that I did too. This is something that he, as a cavalry officer with his troops, would do as well, in terms of literally taking a person's home and sometimes giving them nothing in return for whatever happened. There's also the one that just comes off the top of my head is about Joe Kasabian from Lions Led by Donkeys. Talks about in the early part of his book about being on a walking patrol in Afghanistan, and there's a gentleman there and he's serving ice cream, and one of the other NCOs that's there, part of his squad, I don't think he was actually in Joe's squad, but he was, I don't remember how they were set up at that moment, but anyways, he goes over, somebody had mentioned something about wanting some ice cream, a different soldier, and he goes over and he just takes it and just takes the ice cream from the guy. And Joe mentioned in talking about the book that most people laugh and found that funny, not thinking about that you are literally stealing the man's ability to feed his family, to take care of himself by doing that. And yes, it's a small thing. Ice cream is a small thing, but it's certainly representative of the larger losses that we put on people, because it all compounds. Even if you live in a place like that, even if your whole family wasn't hurt, it's still, you watch this is what happens to your fellow countrymen, because these Americans came and they said they wanted to help and they aren't helping, but they also might kill us. And so we have to stand way back because we don't know what the fuck's going to happen.
Right.
We just want to make it to the other side.
When you're talking about the Israeli-Palestine, we did have operations where we would observe from the sky, where there'd be snipers, U.S. snipers on like residential rooftops. And I always assumed like, oh, maybe they're just abandoned houses, but now it makes perfect sense. They just pulled whoever was in the house out. And there were also times where no due process, we would see someone, we're like, that looks like a suspicious package. Oftentimes when they were crossing the boundaries or avoiding the checkpoints to get into Baghdad, which, is definitely suspicious, and we just blow up their car and blow up their house. Like once we saw them get out, and like, well, I don't know how I feel about that. And there was another time where in this real agricultural area of the city where we had wiped out some sort of bridge, and we saw a piece of heavy equipment was putting the bridge back in place. And I'm assuming it was for commerce or hauling crops. And we, as a military, we're the hammer. Everything we see looks like a nail. I just saw a guy who wanted to get back to work, and we blew up the heavy equipment. And it's like, dang it, like, how hard is it to get a piece of heavy equipment in Baghdad, Iraq?
Almost impossible.
Yeah, especially with all the sanctions that have been going on for so long. And some of those things you think about when you're a young kid and you don't understand what it means to support yourself, or even like geopolitics at all. Why you're even there, you just assume they're all terrorists. Like, you don't really think about it, but after the fact, it's like, man, that didn't feel good. To your point. And
well, sometimes it's even just lack of imagination. Clint Lawrence has mentioned in I hate saying his name, but he has mentioned that he didn't think that the Taliban had family members. He didn't think that these fighters, the terrorists and stuff, that they had mothers, fathers, wives, and kids, and it wasn't within his scope of understanding based on everything that he was told about them up to that point. And he expected to walk into a battle, literal battle, I'm sure in his mind, of these just absolutely horrific terrorists who take no quarter and torture the people that they get. And not that ISIS hasn't done that at certain times, but it has to be understood that everybody has a reason. There's a reason all those guys are willing to pick up those rifles and shoot at Americans. There's a reason that the Iraqis are so absolutely should be. They're beyond fucking enraged about the recent drone strikes that have been happening there. That we continually choose to say, you have no sovereignty. You have no personal sovereignty. You have no national sovereignty. We can choose at any time just to take it away. And we have to get past that notion as Americans. And it's very deeply embedded in us. And I don't know that we ever will, but that is, all you have to do is go on Facebook and see people's memes that they post about a variety of these different things.
To your point, even when you said Taliban, I was like, ooh, I would never, like, in my head, I would never defend that. I just really haven't studied it. But then when you stepped back, it's like, oh yeah, why are they upset at America? Like, yeah, it's probably our foreign policy or something we've done to them that is the reason they're fighting. And I do believe that there are ideals worth fighting for. Like Lee Camp, he's fighting for the truth. I think there are deals worth fighting for. I think a lot of people who are on the fence, or maybe they're getting really one-sided narrative of what it means to be of that race or from those regions. But I have to believe that most people in their mind believe that what they're supporting and defending is like the morally correct thing. So then it does come down to educators and educating ourselves. Like in that Taliban instance, I don't know what I think. I know that they probably have a reason to be mad, and I know that I don't want them attacking people here. So where does that come? I was, for all his faults, I was happy to see the Trump administration opening up to talks with the Taliban. Like that seemed like a progress to me. And I don't know if you guys have covered this already, but Trump seemed like he was against getting into any new wars. I felt like if Hillary was in office, we would have followed through with Iran, which was the plan that General Wesley Clark spoke of in his memoir. And then when he was running for president, he was basically saying that shortly after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon, and a report was circulating that they planned to invade Iraq, and then Somalia, Sudan, ending with Libya was on that list, which has come to pass, and then it all ended with Iran.
Syria, I think, was on that list too.
Yep. So, and you see, they did it. They followed through with the plan, except for Iran. And if you look at that plan, a lot of those refugees from those missions that we accomplished over there, if you want to say accomplished, they led to refugee crises in the EU. So, it's pretty dirty that not only do we destroy the country and turn it into a failed state, but then we block our nation to the refugees from those actions, which obviously it probably wouldn't be a good move to bring people into your country after you destroy their country. But it's just seems pretty dark and short-sighted, and I don't know how many people actually know about it, so I talk about it.
No, I think it's good, man. I think we have to talk about it until we don't until we know it so well that we don't need to. That it's actually a part of our lived culture, which it isn't. So Nate, I think that's a good place for us to wrap it up for today. Thank you again for joining us, for joining our discussion with Lee. Is any last comments, anything you want to leave the people with?
Yeah, I just want to let them know I'm accessible through Instagram. They can, if anything I said is interesting, or if they want to know more, they can just DM me on there, and I'm more than happy to walk them through the application process if they're a veteran that's interested, or if they want to know how to, like, some older folks aren't comfortable donating stuff online, so they're like, hey, what's your address? I want to send a donation that way. So yeah, I'm accessible, and if anyone's interested in writing, follow my journey as well, and at NB Hankus on Instagram. And I'm looking forward to meeting some new folks. So I appreciate you opening it up and having me in on the conversation with Lee, and just diving in a little bit deeper. I wasn't sure what we were going to talk about, but it was a pretty fun conversation. So
that's the beauty of Fortress on a Hill. We never know where we're going to go. We
perfect.
Usually always start with the plan, but sometimes the plan the plan sucks halfway through, and you gotta change it up. But
that's like really being in the military.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thank you, man.
All right. You take care.
I appreciate it. It's good to see you, Henry.
Good to see you too. All right, everybody. That's going to be the end of our stream today. I'm really grateful to Lee and to Nate for joining us and being involved in our discussion. You'll find us at the usual places on Twitter at Fortress on a Hill. Actually, they're all up at the top of the stream. And YouTube, Instagram, Twitch, all those kind of places. And we hope to see you guys again soon. Take care.
We're on Twitter at Fortress on a Hill, and also at Facebook.com at Fortress on a Hill. You can find our main blog page and our full collection of episodes at www.fortressonahill.com. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Patreon, Spotify. You name it, almost anywhere you listen, we're already waiting for you. And hey, we're always in the market for more Patreon supporters. Please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com. And if you're not into giving us a monthly payment, think about giving us a couple bucks on PayPal. The link is in the show notes. Skepticism is one's best armor. Never forget it. We'll see you next time.
I hope you'll pay attention. I will not